Let's discuss Crime 27 of 1128 by C.J. Thomas. This play was published in 1954 and was translated into English by Alan Wendt and Ayappa Panikkar. This play ushered in the age of experimental theatre in Malayalam and was similar in thematic relevance and technique to Ligi Pirandello's Six Characters in Search of an Author, which was published in 1921. Now, this play, Crime, is a very important play because it looks into the way that legal systems work and the way that, people who are just accused of a certain crime are victimized. And this play becomes very relevant even today because it presents the plight of the under trials as well as the mental struggles that unlawful incarceration can bring. Now, that's on the surface. And also, the winding and twisting arguments that are used in courtrooms are also very beautifully presented. The play also highlights the way that exploitation works in society. On a very philosophical level, the play aims to take a very, very objective look at death and declare that there is nothing to be afraid of death. If at all, death should be treated as a joke. And this aspect of death being treated as a joke becomes very clear at the end of the play. As far as the list of characters is concerned, the Guru is the most important character in this play because uh, he is construed as the voice of reason by C.J. Thomas, and Thomas imbues him with essential wisdom, with rationale and logic that he tries to impart to his disciple, who is an idealistic young man who gets carried away. And the disciple is full of these notions of treating death with in all its seriousness, of trying to bring out those philosophical aspects that are attached to death. But the guru deals with these things in a rather light fashion. When I say light fashion, I mean that he does not uh, impact them with a great deal of gravity. He does not over sensationalize death. He tells his disciple death is a joke, really. Now the disciple had actually come into this play because he had heard that the guru had died. So he came to find out whether that was true or not, and he was immensely relieved to find that his guru was alive. And to which this is the answer that the guru gives him: death is actually a joke. Okay, and then the scene shifts to the newspaper. Now, this play happens on different levels. That is, one is the interaction between the guru and the disciple that happens on the stage. Then there is the connection between, Zakaria and Ramakrishnan, who are newspaper men who are out looking for news items, because they are tired of printing the same old news over and over again. And plus, there is not much news that they can print. So they are wondering what to do, and they are out looking for a piece of hot news. When I say they are out, they are actually in their office, but they are searching around for some hot news. And then another level on which the play happens is in terms of the courtroom discussions, where on one hand you have the narration of the murder of Marcos. Then on the other hand, you have the interaction between the lawyers and the judge and the witness. So these are the three levels on which this play is taking place. So, as I was telling you, in the newspaper office, these two men are fretting about not having an item of news with them. And the disciple is also there at the office. And then one of them gets a phone call, and it's understood that it's about a murder, but there are hardly any details available. Okay, it is nothing of an interesting kind of a murder. It's not a mystery. The killer is clear, everything is clear. But the thing is that this is too good an opportunity to let pass. So he inflates the news. He makes it more than what it is. And they decide to publish about 4.5 columns worth of news item with regard to this particular murder, where there was hardly anything to report. And this is something of contemporary relevance because this is exactly how the media works even today. And then you have Marcos's family, who is his wife and his father, and of course the wife has an old friend by the name of Chucky. So the wife and the father, while they grieve the death of Marcos, they're also very worried about their survival. In particular, the wife, because she really does not know how is it that they are going to survive this entire disaster that has taken place. So an earning member of the family has been lost, and then you're forced to question yourself whether death is about an emotional loss, or whether it is about a financial loss, or whether it is a bit of both. So what does the death of a person actually mean? That is a question that needs to be looked into. So Chucky over there is a dramatic device in order to bring out those aspects that Marcos's wife discusses, because Marcos's wife shows her the few coins that Marcos has left behind. She says he drank away all the rest, now only this much remains. I don't know how it is that we are going to survive. And the old man is also worried about that. And then you have Varki, who has been accused of killing Marcos, but there is no proof yet. Now, this is a very, very interesting conundrum that talks about the importance of having witnessed a crime and whether witnessing a crime is enough. Okay, so the nature of crime, of the word crime itself, is questioned by C.J. Thomas here. So, you have also Shastri, who is an accountant at the kiln that Varki and Marcos were working in. So, the case is like this. Marcos's wife and Varki. Okay. Somehow Marcos imagines that his wife is having an affair with Varki, and he confronts him about it while standing on top of the kiln, where below there is a furnace that is blazing. And in anger, Varki pushes him, and Marcos falls into the furnace and is supposed to have burnt to death. But no body has been found. Even the bones have not been found. But Varki has been arrested for the murder of Marcos, because there was no way that Marcos could have survived. And this entire incident was witnessed by an eyewitness who was having his supper somewhere late in the evening. So it is also dark, which is something that you should keep in mind. And when the witness is called to the stand, the witness confirms that he saw Varki push Marcos, but also admits that it was rather dark and that he saw Marcos fall into the furnace, but he can't say that Marcos is dead. He says Marcos has to be dead because anyone who falls into that furnace can only die. That is it. So see, now what we see is that there is a case that has been built on a hypothesis. So for which, Varki should be punished, but he must not be punished. At the same time, he must be punished, but you cannot be sure whether the crime actually took place. But the crime has taken place because Marcos is not to be found anywhere. So where could he go? He could only be burnt to death. So this is the conundrum that this case presents. So this is the aspect that the two lawyers are fighting it out among themselves, and there is also a judge, and you also have two policemen who say that they carried out a psychological interrogation of Varki. Okay, so now all this is very euphemistic. When policemen, say that they carried out a psychological interrogation, and they gave him a hot towel bath and they wiped him down and they were very caring and considerate, etc., you have to understand the menace that lies below these words. Okay, so it's obvious that Varki was having a very tough time mentally, physically in the prison, and he even has a long monologue about how he cannot continue this anymore, and that how he would rather be dead, and he envies Marcos because Marcos has died, and he died immediately, whereas Varki has to die minute by minute, die day by day, kind of a thing. And at one point, Varki commits suicide, tries to commit suicide, sorry. He tries to commit suicide, but that attempt is thwarted. And he is recovered and brought back to life, to which the guru says it's the most absurd thing that one can do. You go ahead and you rescue a man who is already on murder trial, you rescue him and you bring him back to health, and then you decide to hang him. He says that is a very, very absurd way of going about it, and it's one of those things that is wrong with the legal system also. Upon which the disciple asks whether, one should make suicide legal. And then the Guru says, why would dead people care about whether something was legal or illegal? And not only that, if the legality of a thing mattered, then why would, people even attempt suicide? Hmm? And if you're going to punish somebody who was not successful in committing suicide, you should understand that they did not care in the beginning itself. I want you to take a moment and think about the implication of what is being said here, which is very true. If you are going to make suicide punishable, the thing is that people who committed suicide don't really care that it is punishable because they are already dead. Now, what more can you do to them? Now, those that have survived suicide, might be worried that they are going to be prosecuted, and that might just be the encouragement for them to complete the act of suicide that they are committing at that point of time. And not only that, if they already knew that suicide is a punishable crime, and they still do it, even attempt it, is it of any use to actually make it a punishable crime? So, the play is full of such philosophical and such relevant discussions between the guru and the disciple. Okay. And towards the end, what happens is that, the disciple says one has to give some compensation to Marcos's family. They are starving, and we should take this compensation from the factory owner, the kiln owner. We should take the compensation from the kiln owner. And he says, how will we able to give this compensation? And then he realizes his guru is the one who is writing this play. This play has been put in place just so that the disciple could understand that death is, after all, a joke. So he goes to his guru and tells him, please write it into your script that we would like this modification, that this woman has to be given 2000 rupees as compensation by the owner of the kiln. And he says, okay, if that's what you want, I will do it, but I don't like interfering with the stage and its narrative and the lives of the characters. But the disciple insists. And then, the guru says, I'm tired of all of this. This play has begun to bore me. So now we will go straight to the end because, let's finish it off. And so then, what we see is that the play suddenly is in its last stage. Okay. Instead of the entire, series of conversations that are happening, instead of the entire case being played out, the play comes to its very end. And there we see that, the opposition as well as the defending lawyer, everybody is making impassioned appeals for their respective clients. And then the guru says, actually, you people, why are you, making so much of a fuss? Why does it look like this whole thing matters to you? It actually doesn't matter to you. And one of the lawyers says, well, I wanted to come across as a wonderful actor. I wanted to come across as a great character. So that is why, I was putting so much of an effort into all my arguments. And meanwhile, the news comes that Varki has passed away. He didn't commit suicide this time. His heart gave out. He couldn't continue. And then this entire case is rendered pointless, because when you have no accused, when the accused himself is dead, then what case is there? And miraculously, what happens is that Marcos turns up. He comes back and he's there among all of these people. And then the disciple asks, but you were supposed to be dead. How are you alive? And he says, I fell in such a way that I did not fall into the furnace. So I got out through the other side and escaped. I just wanted to have Varki suffer for some time. That is all. I just wanted him to be knocked about a bit and everything like that. And the disciple says, well, now you have managed to kill him. I hope you're happy. And then the guru tells him, go take him home. So the disciple escorts Marcos back to his house, where Shastri is already there, offering the wife a compensation of rupees 100 from the factory, from the kiln owner. And first Shastri tells them there are some people who are trying to get you 2000 rupees. And Marcos's wife is like, who are they to interfere in my matters? And then she realizes that somebody is actually fighting for her rights, that this would mean that she would get more money. And she says, well, in that case, I want 2000 rupees. And the old man, that is Marcos's father, prevents her from asking for any more money, because he says, finally, we will get nothing. He doesn't say that, our son died and this is money for, his death or his blood money. He says we will not get anything in our hands. But the wife insists. And then what happens is that, Shastri increases the amount to 300, finally to 1000, and then turns up, Marcos and the disciple. And they realize that Marcos is not dead after all. And then the wife says, "You never were of any use in your life. You are no use in your death also. You are an inconvenience." And then Marcos wants to know what this money is all about, and he wants to find out who gave this money, and why is it that it will not be given anymore, and so on. And finally, Shastri gets exasperated and throws the money on the ground and says, "Take it anyway. It is only stage money." So you see, again, this play time and again, brings attention upon the fact that it is actually a play, that this is all staged. There is nothing real. All of these aspects are, insisted upon, and we will come to that aspect later. Now, there's one aspect that I forgot to mention, that, when the play comes to an end, and I told you that all of these final arguments are being made, what happens is that the guru asks Chucky to take over as the lawyers. He says that, "I think you will do a better job, so why don't you also play out the arguments?" Now, this is very, very significant because, it tells you that after all, we are all just playing a role in our lives. If, we are not there, somebody else can very well take our place. So, what is the big deal? So this is also another way of helping one treat death as a joke, to make people understand that even if you're not there, somebody else will be taking your place, that the show will always go on. So to that effect, this play uses the technique of play within the play. And it also uses the technique of self-reflexivity. That is, of course, when a work draws attention to its artifice or fictionality. It is also called self-referentiality. This kind of self-reflexivity is seen in modernist works very often. It lends a very unsettling or alienating feeling, and it can help draw attention to the fact that the audience knows from the beginning that they're watching a play. It is a complex device that must achieve a certain balance between being too obscure and too intrusive. See, that is something that needs to be kept in mind, because if there are frequent interruptions, then the play becomes very intrusive. It becomes very, very disturbing. It is difficult to focus. And if it is not done in the right way, then the play becomes very difficult to understand. You don't know what is happening. So, as I told you before, the play Crime deals with the issue of death and its aftermath on the living on different levels. First, it looks at death philosophically through the guru and his disciple, as I told you that. Okay, and only after a long time does the disciple really reconcile himself to this truth. Then the next aspect is that it deals with death and the legal hassles that are presented through the courtroom scenes, where the characters make this impassioned appeal. I told you the lawyers are passionately appealing for Varki to be killed, I mean hanged, so that the death or the murder of Marcos can be avenged, and so on. And this whole absurdity of courts and the role played by the lawyers is highlighted by making Chucky take over the role of the lawyers. And of course, you have the aspect of the survivors of any death, as is highlighted by the plight of Marcos's wife and father. If you're looking for an example of self-reflexivity in the play, I think that the disciples' decision to help the victim's family get compensation by asking the guru to change the script is brilliant. Okay, because on another level, if you look at this play, it could also be that there is a God and there is his son, that is the disciple, and how it is that God views the world kind of in an Old Testament kind of a way, and there is a disciple who views it in a New Testament kind of a way, talking about mercy, talking about passionately being involved in the lives of all the characters who are part of the play. This entire thing can be metaphorical for certain belief systems in religion. Okay, and on earth, while all of this is happening in the heaven, on earth we human beings attribute it to fate or destiny or one of those absurd notions, like for example misfortune. We say, oh, such a misfortune, or it is destiny, fate, etc. So we attribute it to all of these things, whereas in the heavens, all our lives might just be a play that has been organized by the Father for the edification or the education of his Son in some important lessons in life. So that way, this is a very, very metaphorical play. Okay. And also, it brings to our lives the plight of ordinary people, as in the case of, Marcos's wife. So it also looks into the dynamics of economics. That is how, when Marcos was a dead man, what were the politics that was going around him? What was the kind of conversation that was going around him? The need for justice, the need for survival of his family members, and so on. But once he comes back, then again he is being judged on how good a provider he was, how good a worker he was, what sort of a human being he was, and so on. Okay, so in the end, finally, the disciple learns his lesson. Okay, that death is a joke and that it should be treated in a matter of fact manner. Because after all, the man who was supposed to have died is alive, and the man who was supposed to be killed in revenge is dead anyway. If you think about it, there was no crime committed, but a punishment has been served. Now, generally, this play is compared to Luigi Pirandello's play that was written in 1921 but has lost none of its freshness, charm, and relevance. And, like in C.J. Thomas's play, Six Characters in Search of an Author also examines the plight of those people whose stories are never told. So here there are six characters who come onto the stage where a play is about to be rehearsed, and they demand that they meet with any author for that matter, so that their story can be told, because they cannot leave this place without having themselves be heard. So that play looks at art, life, relationships, and the way that we automatically form these impressions about people just by hearing about them, or making those assumptions because of the kind of work that they do. Okay, so and the play also draws attention to the fact that it is actually a play. So that element of self-reflexivity is what is extremely common with Thomas's play. So, like in the play Crime, there are frequent interruptions that serve to fracture the narrative and ensure that the audience is not complacent and is aware of the fact that it is watching a play whose only aim is not to entertain them, but also to make them think. See, both in the case of Crime as well as in the case of Six Characters, both these plays have tried to make the audience think through the technique of self-reflexivity. Okay, and what have they made the audience think? That there is more to these lines than what meets the eye, that these lines are metaphorical for something greater, something bigger, that there are greater social, cultural, as well as philosophical, let's say, pieces of wisdom that are hidden behind these lines, that these are all matters or aspects that one should seriously be considering in order to create an ideology for oneself. So that is what is the most striking piece of similarity between these two plays. So I hope it was a useful video for you. Thank you.